My boyfriend's best friend was also his ex. I tried to ignore the red flags, but now I'm discovering a web of lies and betrayal that could destroy us. I started dating my boyfriend, Jeff, 10 months ago. This relationship has been amazing so far, and I definitely see a future with him. There's just one problem. He has a weird relationship with his ex that's starting to make me really uncomfortable and suspicious. And when we started dating, he often talked about his best friend, Jenna, who he also owns a business with. He made it pretty clear that she was an important person to him. I knew they had spent vacations together, and he mentioned hanging out with her parents a few times too. A few weeks after I met him, I creeped through all his pictures on Facebook, because who doesn't do that with someone they just started dating? And saw a bunch of very coupley pictures of him and Jenna. I also found her Instagram and looked through it, and it's filled with pictures of Jeff. A bunch of them had the hashtag #CHUT relationship goals and other similar things. So in this way, I figured out that they had dated. I kept waiting for him to tell me that himself, but he never did. About 2 months after we started dating, I straight up asked him if he had dated her, and he admitted it. He said that they had met in school and had similar ideals and ambitions. They dated for 9 months and broke up a year and a half ago. I asked him why they'd broken up, and he said their relationship was awful and they worked much better as friends. They started their business after they broke up, and things have apparently been going well between them since then. I started to get kind of suspicious about her, though, when time passed and I still hadn't met her. I met his friends and family pretty soon after we started dating, but I didn't meet Jenna. I went to numerous social events that I'd expect her to be at, but she was never there. There were a number of occasions when our paths almost crossed, and I really thought I was going to meet her, but I never did. For example, I went to their office a few times to meet Jeff after work, and Jenna was already gone. Or sometimes I'd come to meet him, and he'd come outside to meet me so I wouldn't have to go inside. Things started to get really weird about 3 months ago. Jeff and Jenna were having an open house night one evening. Jeff came over to my place after work, and we had a few hours to kill before it was time to go, so we went out for dinner and then walked to the office. I was kind of expecting that I'd come in and help them set up, but when we were a block away, he started asking me if I had lots of work to do and saying there was a really nice coffee shop nearby. He actually walked me to the coffee shop and sat me down, then left to go get ready with Jenna. He told me to come to the office in an hour and a half. About half an hour before I left for the office, I texted Jeff and said I hoped everything was going well and asked if there was anything I could do. He replied and said, "Something's come up for Jenna, and she can't be here tonight." I was getting really suspicious at this point. I went to the office half an hour later, and sure enough, Jenna wasn't there. People kept asking about her all night, and Jeff told them she'd had a family emergency. When we walked back to the car later that night, he told me what happened. While he and Jenna were getting ready, she had had a panic attack and said she was scared to meet me. She said she wouldn't be able to handle it and either had to leave or he had to tell me not to come. He told her to leave, so she did. Since then, a couple more weird things have happened, and I still haven't met Jenna. Once, when I was hanging out with Jeff, we went to the office so he could grab something. When we were almost there, he looked at his phone and said, "Jenna's still there. Let's just go for a walk." So we walked around the block for half an hour and then came back when she was gone. After that happened, I told Jeff I felt really uncomfortable with the situation. I could respect that they were friends who had dated, but the way she was acting about me was very suspicious. He apologized and said he had actually been really mad at her but wasn't sure what to do. He also told me a couple other weird stories about things she'd done. He went to a party a few weeks ago. I didn't go, and his phone had died that night. When he got home and charged his phone, it was full of texts from Jenna saying she was outside in her car and asking if I was there or not. She actually never even ended up going to the party, simply because she didn't know if I was there or not. Now here's the kicker. Jeff and Jenna are currently on a 2-week-long camping trip. They've been planning this trip since before I met him, but considering the way she's behaved, I feel very uncomfortable about him being on this trip. I just looked at her Instagram and she's posted 5 new pictures of him. As awesome as Jeff is, I'm really fed up with this, and I'm seriously considering breaking things off when he gets back. Am I being unreasonable? Update 1. I wrote my previous post over a year ago, and a lot has happened since then. I wanted to give everyone an update, since the advice on this sub was really helpful at the time. For a few months after I wrote my OP, nothing much happened. Jeff and I continued dating, and he continued being friends, partners with Jenna. I never met her, but everything else in our relationship seemed to be going so well that I decided I'd try to deal with it. Things got really hard, however, when I had to take a work contract 12 hours away from home for 3 months. I hardly saw Jeff the whole time, and I looked at Jenna's Instagram almost every day to see if she'd posted more photos of them together. More often than not, she had. Since I wasn't physically present, I felt like Jenna was his real girlfriend. I felt completely worthless and constantly stressed out, knowing my boyfriend was spending all his time with another woman who I already had suspicions about. While I was away for work, I decided to break up with Jeff. I broke up with as soon as I came back, and I made it very clear that his relationship with Jenna was intolerable for me. I told him he was going to have a hard time dating anyone who wasn't her as long as she was still in his life. He kept saying he didn't understand why it was such a problem. He told me he couldn't control her behavior, but he promised me he hadn't cheated on me. I explained to him that by allowing their friendship to continue, he was condoning her behavior. I told him I didn't really even care if he'd physically cheated or not, since he'd already shown disrespect for me and our relationship. And then I didn't speak to him for a few months, and I went on with my life. I took another contract out of town and even considered moving permanently to another city. One night, though, Jeff called me and apologized. He said he had been thinking about our relationship a lot and realized he had been in the wrong. He said his relationship with Jenna was beginning to feel toxic to him, and he'd made arrangements to dissolve their business partnership. After that, I decided to meet up with him, not necessarily give him another chance, and discuss the situation further. When we met up, he promised to stop talking to Jenna and unfollowed her on all social media. As of now, he has not spoken to her in 6 months, and we've gotten back together. We actually ran into her at a concert a few weeks ago, and they didn't even say hi to each other. I feel much more respected and confident in my relationship now. Update 2. Hey everyone! It's been about 6 months since my last update. And well, things have gotten a bit complicated. I'm really hoping to get some clarity from you all because I'm honestly at a loss here. So, after my last post, Jeff and I were doing really well. I mean, we were finally in a place where it felt like we were on solid ground, and the whole Jenna situation seemed like a bad dream that we'd both moved on from. Jeff was really stepping up, showing me how committed he was, and I genuinely felt like we were building something special. We started planning a trip together, looking at apartments to move in together, and just getting back to a good place. But of course, nothing is ever that simple, right? A couple of months ago, Jeff and I were at a friend's party, just having a great time. The vibe was chill, and I wasn't really thinking about Jenna at all. Like, she hadn't crossed my mind in weeks. But then, out of nowhere, one of Jeff's old friends, let's call him Mike, came up to us, and after a few drinks, he started reminiscing about the old days with Jeff and Jenna. He wasn't being malicious, just drunk and chatty. But he started telling me stories about Jeff and Jenna's relationship that I'd never heard before. And guys, these were not the kinds of stories you want to hear about your boyfriend and his ex. Mike kept going on about how Jeff and Jenna used to have this crazy deep connection, and how everyone thought they were going to end up together. At one point, he even said something like, "Man, I don't think Jeff's ever going to find someone who gets him like Jenna did." I just stood there, feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. Jeff looked mortified and tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. That night, I didn't say much about it to Jeff, but it was clear that both of us were feeling the awkwardness. Over the next few days, I couldn't get Mike's words out of my head. I started to wonder if Jeff had really been honest with me about his feelings for Jenna, or if maybe there was more to their relationship than he'd let on. I even started to doubt whether Jeff was truly over her. It felt like everything I'd thought we'd worked through was coming back to haunt me. So, I did what any sane person would do in this situation. I went into detective mode. I didn't go full-on stalker, but I did a little digging. I checked out Jenna's social media again, something I hadn't done since Jeff had unfollowed her. To my surprise, her Instagram was now set to private, which was odd because it had always been public before. That made me even more suspicious, like maybe she was trying to hide something. Around the same time, Jeff started acting a little off. Nothing major, just small things. Like he'd be more protective of his phone, or he'd seem distracted during our conversations. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid, but it was hard not to notice. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I confronted Jeff about how I was feeling. At first, he was really understanding. He reassured me that Mike was just drunk and talking out of his ass, and that I had nothing to worry about. But when I asked him directly if he'd had any contact with Jenna since we got back together, he hesitated. It was just a split-second pause, but it was enough to make my heart drop. He eventually said no, but something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. The next day, I did something I'm not proud of. I checked Jeff's phone while he was in the shower. I know. Total invasion of privacy, but I was desperate for answers. What I found wasn't what I expected. There were no messages from Jenna, no calls, nothing. But there was a text thread with someone named Jay, who I assumed was Jenna, that had been completely wiped clean. The thread itself was still there, but all the messages had been deleted. My mind went into overdrive. Why would he delete their conversations if there was nothing going on? I confronted Jeff about it, and at first he denied everything. But after I showed him the empty thread, he finally admitted that Jenna had reached out to him a couple of months ago, just to check in and see how he was doing. He swore up and down that he didn't respond, and that he deleted the messages because he didn't want to upset me. He said it was a mistake, and that he regretted not telling me about it right away. He even offered to block her number completely, which he did right in front of me, but here's the thing. I'm not sure I believe him. I want to, but there's this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that I can't shake. Why would Jenna reach out to him now, after all this time? And why would Jeff hide it from me if it was really as innocent as he claims? I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to believe that Jeff is telling the truth and that we can move past this. But another part of me is terrified that this whole situation is far from over, and that Jenna is still lurking in the background, just waiting to stir things up again. I feel like I'm stuck in this loop of doubt and mistrust, and I don't know how to get out of it. So, Reddit, I need your advice. Am I overreacting here? Should I just let this go and trust that Jeff is being honest with me? Or is this a red flag that I can't afford to ignore? I'm really struggling to figure out what's best for me and for our relationship, and I could use some outside perspectives right now. Update 3. All right, Reddit. Buckle up because this last update is going to be a doozy. I didn't expect to be writing this so soon after my last post, but things have escalated in ways I never could have imagined. After my last update, I was pretty much at my wit's end. The trust issues between Jeff and me were really taking a toll, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. I kept trying to tell myself to give Jeff the benefit of the doubt, but every time I looked at him, I felt this deep unease, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew I couldn't go on like this, so I decided to take a step back and spend a weekend away at my best friend's place. I needed some space to clear my head and figure out what I wanted to do next. Jeff was supportive of this decision, almost too supportive, which struck me as a bit odd. He didn't seem as concerned about our relationship as I was, and that just added to my worries. So I went to my friend's place, about 3 hours away, and tried to relax. But even there, I couldn't stop thinking about Jeff and Jenna. It was like they had taken up permanent residence in my mind, and I hated that they had this power over me. My friend was great, listening to me vent and offering advice, but even she couldn't convince me to stop worrying. On the second day of my trip, I got a message from an unknown number. The text simply said, "You deserve to know the truth." My heart dropped. I showed the message to my friend, and she suggested I ignore it, thinking it was probably some prank or scam, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was connected to Jeff and Jenna somehow. Against my better judgment, I replied, asking who it was. The response came quickly. Jenna. I felt like the ground was slipping out from under me. I immediately called Jeff, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Panic set in. I didn't know what Jenna was trying to pull, but I knew it couldn't be good. A few minutes later, Jenna texted me again, this time with an address. It was in a part of town I didn't recognize, but she added, "Come here if you want to know the truth about Jeff." My friend told me not to go, that it was probably some sick joke, but I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I needed to know what was going on. I drove back to town, adrenaline pumping the entire way. When I arrived at the address, it was a small, nondescript house in a quiet neighborhood. My hands were shaking as I knocked on the door. To my surprise, Jenna answered almost immediately, looking just as I'd imagined, except she seemed nervous, not at all like the confident, composed woman I'd built up in my head. We sat down in her living room and she started talking before I even had a chance to process what was happening. She told me that she had reached out to Jeff a few months ago because she had been going through a tough time and she missed their friendship. She claimed that at first, Jeff didn't respond, just like he had told me. But eventually, after a few more messages, he did. They started talking more, and before long, they were meeting up. First for coffee, then for dinners. She swore up and down that it was just platonic, but I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She then dropped the bombshell. About a month ago, they slept together. She said it was a mistake, something that happened in a moment of weakness, and that they both regretted it immediately. Jenna was visibly upset as she recounted this, saying that she didn't know why she was telling me now, but that she felt like I had the right to know. I just sat there, numb, trying to process the betrayal. I left her house in a daze. I felt like my world had crumbled in a matter of minutes. I drove straight to Jeff's place, not even sure what I was going to say, but knowing that I needed to confront him. When I got there, he was home, and as soon as he saw my face, he knew something was wrong. I didn't even let him speak. I just asked him, point blank, if he had slept with Jenna. His face went pale, and he looked like he was going to be sick. After what felt like an eternity, he admitted it. He tried to explain, saying that it was a one-time thing, that he had been feeling confused and vulnerable, and that it didn't mean anything. But I couldn't listen to his excuses. I told him that we were done, that there was no coming back from this. He tried to stop me, saying that he was sorry, that he had made a huge mistake, but I was already out the door. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and relief as I walked away from him, knowing that I was finally free of this toxic situation. So here I am, a few days later, trying to pick up the pieces of my life. I feel like I've been put through the ringer, but I also feel strangely empowered. I know now that I deserve better than what Jeff was willing to give me, and that I can't settle for someone who isn't fully committed to me. Thank you to everyone who has been following my story and offering advice. It's been a rough ride, but I'm ready to move forward and start a new chapter in my life. Without Jeff, and definitely without Jenna.